Hello and welcome everybody to this live broadcast from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. My name is Chris. I am curator of the Daily Planet at the museum in beautiful downtown Raleigh. Of course, right now, we're not at the museum in downtown Raleigh, but I did bring a lovely picture of it here. Here's your Daily Planet. And who better to represent Earth today than the Museum of Natural Sciences, because we have the world's largest Earth attached to our building. Well, I think it's like the second largest Earth on Earth. But what that means is that this museum loves to celebrate Earth Day. This week, Monday through Friday at noon, every day, right here on YouTube Live, we're bringing you experts across a variety of different fields who will share their knowledge, insight, expertise, and passion for the planet right here at the museum's YouTube channel. So I'm thrilled that you're here with us to hear from today's very special guest. Today, we will be meeting and hearing from Dr. Kathie Dello. Kathie is the state climatologist for North Carolina. The state climate office is out of North Carolina State University. Kathie, hello.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. How are you doing? How's your side of North Carolina today?
Well, I'm only a few blocks from the museum, and it's cold and wet here over in my side of Raleigh.
Yeah, same here. Looking out my windows, it's a little chilly and it's been raining all morning. But weather's not climate, right?
No, it's not. We'll talk about that.
Oh, that's fantastic. How have you been? Right, we're all in kind of a strange time right now. How are things in downtown Raleigh?
Well, it is a very strange time, and as you know, I'm fairly new to North Carolina. So I did get a chance to settle in before we all got sent into quarantine. You probably heard some horns in the background. I am in downtown Raleigh, so please bear with me. But it is great being downtown now because there's still great takeout available, lots of green space where you can socially distance. So I'm trying to make the most of it. How about you?
Doing the same. I don't live in downtown anywhere. I live in a pretty rural area, actually part of North Carolina. And so, getting out and walking up and down the street, I don't have to pass anybody. And I've got a great big yard. So spending a lot of time outside. The dog loves it. Absolutely loves it. So we're making the most out of the situation here as well. So you've been state climate officer now for North Carolina for almost a year. Is that right?
Yeah, I got here last July, and it's been really, really fun and really rewarding, and I can't wait to get back out into North Carolina.
Yeah, well, me too. And I've been here for a little bit longer. How are you finding North Carolina?
I'm loving it. Everybody is really friendly. I love Raleigh. I love the Triangle, but also I need the mountains in my life. So it's great that we have those, the biggest ones east of the Mississippi. And then the beach on the other side. It's really everything you could ever want. So really, really liking it. The heat in the summer is a little tough for somebody who came from the north, but I'm dealing with it.
Yeah, you'll get used to it. You'll get used to it.
That's what they say.
That, well, everybody, I hope that you're ready to learn a little bit about climate change in North Carolina. Kathie, take it away.
Can you see my first slide?
Oh, let's keep trying. We're not sharing yet. That's okay.
Okay.
There we go.
How about that?
There it is.
Great. 6 weeks of Zoom and I'm still getting the hang of it. But
Everybody is.
So thank you everybody for joining today. I want to acknowledge that this is an absolutely crazy time for many of us, and normally my job involves going out and talking with a lot of folks, and I'm not doing much of that now. And a bunch of my events got canceled early on because obviously, we have really big issues to face right now. So talking about climate change is even a little bit weird for me. So I want to acknowledge that if this seems very daunting, it is for all of us, but we'll get to this at the end. I think there are a lot of lessons and a lot of parallels that we can take away from this and apply them to our thinking about climate change. Today, I'm going to focus just on North Carolina. I'm going to draw some material from a report that came out last month. It was led by my colleague, Dr. Ken Kunkel, up in Asheville. I was an author on the report along with many other experts around North Carolina. It's North Carolina's climate science report. It was delivered to the governor as a deliverable for Executive Order 80, which is a transition to a clean energy economy for North Carolina. And this report is really important because it lays the science foundation for us. It tells us what we know about our climate, how it's changed in the past, what we expect in the future, and then we have this really solid science basis to make decisions from. So I want to reiterate that my group at NC State University, the State Climate Office, we've been around for 44 years. We do user-driven research. We're always working with folks who have to make a decision to supply them with the sound science. We don't make any policy decisions on our own. We hope that the information that we use, though, that we produce is policy relevant. So as Chris said, I got here last July. I'm really enjoying being the state climatologist and really look forward to talking with you today. Given that this is a strange time to talk about climate change, I'm giving a slightly shorter version of a talk that I would normally give and leaving the end open for lots of questions and discussion, figuring that this might be the chance you have to talk to a climatologist today, this week, this month, this year. So just starting things right off, that we're gonna start with the global perspective, thinking about that giant globe outside the museum. 2019 was the second hottest year on record globally. It's undeniable that our planet's warming. We're not seeing record cold global temperature records anymore. And these sorts of things are now so common. When I get the press release, I know it's coming. We know the planet's warming, but you say, great, Kathie, we live here in North Carolina. We live in this very specific place. What does this mean for me? And it's a very valid question to ask. Moving closer to home, 2019 was our warmest year on record here in North Carolina. So we're following that global trend. 1990 was our previous warmest year on record. This last decade has been our warmest decade on record. We're seeing what's happening to the planet show up here in our backyards in North Carolina. And this has a lot of implications for how impacts may play out, how we may see certain things change or are seeing certain things change. But I wanted to talk a little bit about just temperature anomalies. When we talk about these records, we're talking about maybe a degree Fahrenheit warmer than the last previous year. And you think, a degree Fahrenheit, that's not that much. If I told you it's going to be 77 degrees tomorrow and then 78 degrees the next day, you probably wouldn't change your mind all that much about what you're going to do or think it's even that different. But we're talking about these long-term averages. So you have to get a lot of these warm days to get to 1 degree Fahrenheit overall. Or if you think about it like something like a fever, if you're thinking about 1, 2, 3 degrees above your normal body temperature, there's usually a problem. And certainly we're thinking about that a lot right now. So these 1 degree average temperatures really do make a difference, and that we really see them play out in our extremes. So I mentioned a little bit that I'm loving getting out and seeing North Carolina, and I love living here because it has a little bit of everything. I specifically love the mountains, but who doesn't love going to the beach? And here we have a really diverse topography, really diverse communities, both in terms of ecological communities, but also the folks that live here. And all the state climatologists, I think, like to brag that their state has the most extreme climate. But we have the tallest mountains east of the Mississippi. Mount Mitchell is the tallest point. And then we have a lot of area at sea level. Many points along the coast aren't higher than 6 feet. And we have folks who have lived here for generations and generations and generations. And then we have folks like me who show up and probably take up too much space in North Carolina. But we're all living together and the state's growing very rapidly. And then we're at this really unique part of the country where we have some tropical influences, but we also see some more of the continental northern climate show up. So I was warned about many things when I moved here. The first was the pollen, which absolutely tracks and checks out. And second was how the triangle would react to snow. And that one wasn't exactly the meltdown that I heard it would be, but we do get a little bit of winter weather here, and then we have those really hot summers. So without climate change, we're dealing with quite a bit climate-wise. Our wettest spot in the state, Lake Toxaway, is just 30 miles as the crow flies from the normal driest spots in the state, Asheville. So a lot of things going on here, a lot of aspects of climate and microclimate at play. And then we're adding this human-caused change on top of it. So it really is a complex issue to grapple with. So we hinted in the pre-show, I guess that's what it's called, that there's a difference between weather and climate, and we all have our favorite analogies. Mine is that weather is your mood and climate's your personality. You might have bad days. You might throw a temper tantrum, but overall you might be a really warm, even-keeled sort of person. Here in North Carolina, we're seeing a lot more of those bad mood days and bad mood events. And in 2018, we set a new state precipitation record at Mount Mitchell. So almost 12 feet of precipitation, which blew away the previous record. But then we start to feel just our overall personality through those extremes. So we're starting to see some of these extreme events and starting to make the connection, maybe our personality is changing a bit too. But when we're thinking about climate, it's these much longer term averages. When we look out the window today and say it's cold and rainy, well, that's the weather. So this is a figure that I like to show. My colleague, Ed Hawkins in the UK, put together these climate stripes to show how the climate has historically changed. And a colleague, Jared Rennie, up in Asheville, has created all sorts of configurations for all of the states and counties, and I encourage you to check those out. North Carolina's warmed about 1 degree Fahrenheit in the past. So again, going back to that degree Fahrenheit, why does it matter? Well, it is a pretty big deal. I will say the planet's warmed about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So North Carolina has warmed a bit more slowly than the planet. And on these stripes, you see obviously different shades of blue and red. Anything with a red stripe is warmer than the historical average. Anything with a blue stripe, cooler. So you likely see it bouncing around. The 1930s pop out there as being warm. And then we get into the 60s, and the Southeast was cooler than normal. In the 1970s, 1980s, we started catching up. So we've been warming consistently. Most of the years in the last 10 years have been warmer than normal. We still have cooler than normal years every now and then in North Carolina. The overall trend is that we're warming. And I like to tell folks, climate's not a stair step. So just because 2019 was our warmest year on record, it doesn't mean that 2020 will be, although we are certainly off to the races with that one. So every year, there's a few different things going on. There's natural variability. There's all that stuff I talked about early on that influence the climate. And then there's the human-caused change. But we know that North Carolina is warming due to human-caused factors. So when we start to look at graphs, and I promise I won't show too many, because I know they're difficult to look at over a lunchtime chat, but 2019 was our warmest on record, and you can see here those climate stripes play out just in terms of data points. So certainly it was warmer in the beginning of the 20th century, cooled down due to a number of factors, natural variability and land use being among them, but we've warmed back up considerably. And I want to point out that it hasn't necessarily been the warm days, even though I was complaining about those early on. we're not really seeing a historical trend in hot days. The maximum temperatures, they have been above normal, but it's not as striking as the next graph that I'm going to show you, which is our nighttime temperatures. Those have warmed considerably, especially in the past decade. And the last 5 years have had our warmest overnight temperatures on record. And you may say to me, big deal, what does it matter? It's cooler at night. Well, we need cooler temperatures for agriculture. Certain plants, especially our stone fruits, need a certain number of cool temperatures or chilling hours to fully develop. We have a lot of folks who work outside all day in those really hot days and then may lack sufficient access to cooling at night at home. So their bodies are already stressed, their temperatures are elevated, and they may not be able to cool down overnight. So there really is a specific public health implication to these overnight temperatures. This is a trend that we're seeing in the US as a whole, but especially in the Southeast. And there are a few different explanations for that. At night, essentially, there's less air to warm, so that little bit of sensitivity that we're adding to the system with human-caused climate change heats up that air much faster. But we're looking at both these days and nights, but keeping a special watch on these nighttime temperatures, because that's what's really driving our average temperature. So I like to start with the take-homes on the impacts piece. If you want to check out and go ride the Peloton or whatever it is, this is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of time. North Carolina is warming, and we're expecting warming outside of anything we've seen in our past in the future. And that's under two emission scenarios that I'll talk about. One where we burn fewer fossil fuels, and one where we kind of keep doing what we're doing right now. We're feeling climate change now, so we don't get the luxury of talking about this as a future problem anymore. It's here in North Carolina, it's here in our backyard, and we're seeing it through the sea level rise and extreme downpours. And some of those other exposures I talked about, we haven't seen a trend in hot days. We're actually expecting to see that pick up and see more hotter days in the future. Humidity will increase, so for somebody like me who is saying I'm having trouble with the summer heat, that's not going to get a little bit easier. And then diseases. So vector-borne diseases, plant diseases, those will all increase in the future. We haven't necessarily seen the brunt of that yet. And we're expecting disruptive sea level rise. This is a bullet point that I drew from the climate science report that came out last month. It's one of, I would say, our blockbuster impacts with climate change, certainly here in North Carolina. And we have a number of communities that are at risk of inland flooding. So Asheville has seen some flooding in the past few years from extreme precipitation events. We're looking at compound events, so sea level rise plus extreme precipitation. You think about places like downtown Durham and downtown Raleigh, where there's been a lot of development. Flash flooding is something that actually kills a lot of people. And then we have these communities that have taken a number of hits over the past few years, whether it be from hurricanes or extreme precipitation, and are constantly in recovery mode. Here, we're moving into hurricane season, unfortunately, in the next few weeks. Our strongest hurricanes are expected to become stronger. I put a star next to that because we know that hurricanes are measured through wind speed, and those of us who live here in North Carolina recognize that the impacts aren't always from wind. We see storm surge, we see flooding, which doesn't end up in that Saffir-Simpson scale category rating. So hurricanes like Florence, which were in a category 5, can cause extreme devastation. And then the Southeast is rapidly urbanizing. We know that cities like Charlotte and the Triangle are growing extremely rapidly, and this will enhance climate vulnerabilities and challenges. But then on the flip side, rural communities have unique challenges with adaptive capacity, either because resources are being diverted to urban areas or for whatever reason, they no longer have the social capital or the community leader in place to deal with adaptation. So let's talk about the future here in North Carolina. We can talk about what we know using climate models. And you're seeing all sorts of models in the news right now, and you recognize that they have limitations. But they are a tool for us to understand the future and try to figure out the best sort of response. And we only have one planet. Well, we have the planet that's attached to the museum, but we have one planet that we're living on. And when I tell my two young nieces that I'm a scientist, they think it's pretty cool until they realize I'm not dealing with animals or potions, dealing with computers. And that's because we have to recreate our planet in a computer. We're living on it, we're performing an experiment on it now, but we need to figure out a way to perform other experiments on it. So those of us who have spent way too much time in school took all sorts of math and physics classes to understand how the ocean and atmosphere operate normally. And we put those into the computer. But we have to stop there and say, okay, that's the easy part. And I'm not being flip. That really is the easy part. The most difficult part is the human component, us, how we're going to behave, how we're going to react. So we have 7.5 billion people on this planet. And we have to figure out how they're going to behave and react to this very complex problem. And we can't model 7.5 billion different responses. So we can model a few. And one of them is what you see here in the green. It's a lower emissions future for North Carolina. And I say for North Carolina, but this is really global behavior. This is where we adhere to our Paris Agreement targets. And when I say we, I don't just mean the United States, but the entire planet. We make a considerable effort to reduce our fossil fuel use. We move toward renewables. It's a big lift. The higher emissions, the red here, is where we essentially don't make a lot of policy change. We keep burning fossil fuels, and there are questions about how many of those we have left. But we don't really change our behaviors all that much. So what you're seeing here are two different kind of futures for North Carolina. The green is where the globe does enact policy change. The red is where it doesn't. And by the end of the century, that's a range of about 4 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And those are two completely different North Carolinas. But even 4 degrees is a different North Carolina than the one we know now. I mentioned that we've warmed about 1 degree Fahrenheit in the recent past, so that's 4 times as much. What you do see here is that the two scenarios don't really diverge until about mid-century. So we've bought into a certain amount of warming. We have to think about adaptation because North Carolina is going to continue to warm. Regardless of us completely coming out of this pandemic and saying, yeah, we're never going to drive cars again, which isn't going to happen. So there might be a few of you out there who say, why should I trust your computer planet, Kathie? Well, we can play devil's advocate. We have observations for the climate in the past. And that's what we see in the orange line. That's the North Carolina graph that I've now shown you in 2 different forms, the climate stripes and the one we saw from NOAA. And then we ask the models to reproduce the 20th century, which we see in the gray bar range right there. So it does a pretty good job. So if you're a decision maker, you're thinking, this is a warmer North Carolina, 4 to 10 degrees by the end of the century, and I'm not necessarily in control individually as to which scenario plays out. But what this does give us is a roadmap for thinking about the future, for trying to read what's going on globally, what's going on nationally, what we're doing here in North Carolina, and planning for either that 4 or 10 degree Fahrenheit future, with the best guess being somewhere else in the middle. On a rainy day like today, I had to make sure to talk about precipitation. It's likely that we're going to get wetter here in North Carolina, and it is virtually certain, which is language we used in the North Carolina climate science report that it will become more humid just due to a warmer ocean and a warmer atmosphere. So bad news for those of you folks who have a tough time in August. And as a result of those two things together, it's very likely that extreme precipitation will continue to increase. And what you see on the figure on the right is change in days with precipitation over 3 inches of rain. 3 inches of rain is a lot. Right before we got on the webcast, I looked at our weather station at Lake Wheeler. It has received just under an inch of rain in the past 24 hours, and it feels like it's been relentless. So 3 inches is a big event, but when you look at the futures, the top panel is the higher scenario for the immediate future. That's that red, the globe doesn't do much about climate change. You see an increase in the number of days, especially up in the mountains. And then the two lower panels are mid-century, thinking about, okay, maybe the planet does do something, the lower scenario, or doesn't do something. And you see an increase in all of those days. So we have to think about flooding just all over the state, not only on the coast. If you're a gardener, you've likely seen that maybe you can grow some different things, or maybe our cold hardiness zone has shifted in the past few years. I just pulled this one out for Greensboro to look at a different part of the state. Historically, historical emissions, we would be at about a 7B in the cold hardiness zone. And you're thinking a warmer planet, maybe we can grow new things, maybe our growing season's longer, and those things are absolutely true. Looking at the mid-century in that higher emission scenario, we go up almost an entire cold hardiness zone, and not just almost, an entire cold hardiness zone up to 8B. So if you're a hobby gardener, you're thinking about planting different things, but if agriculture is your livelihood and your lifeblood, maybe you've been growing the same thing for 7 generations. You have that infrastructure, you have that knowledge, and then all of a sudden, climate change is throwing you this curveball that crop might not grow as well here in the future. Or we're talking about growing things that we like, but when we think about growing seasons, that also includes the weeds and other things that we don't want here, the invasive species. So there is a two-sided coin to all of this. When we're thinking about the heat index, I told you it's going to be virtually certain that it'll be more humid in the future. We're looking at an increase in hot days, which we haven't necessarily seen in the past. We're looking at a projected change in days with the heat index, which is a calculation that factors in basically how your body perceives the heat, of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit across the entire state, even in the mountains. They're faring a little bit better. You see that there's maybe 0 to 10 days more, but down here in the Triad and the Triangle and even on the coast, a lot more of those really hot days. And we have a number of things to worry about with hot days around public health. I mentioned folks who have to work outside, folks who don't have access to air conditioning, folks who live in the hottest parts of the city on a normal day. Our most vulnerable are the most at risk with these days with the heat index over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the National Climate Assessment, which is an assessment that comes out roughly every 3 to 4 years nationally, showed that outdoor laborers are the most vulnerable to heat-related deaths. So everything I've been talking about, this makes sense. If you're a business owner, though, you'll have to make decisions about if it's safe to actually send somebody outside on those days. So this plot is just showing the change in hours worked, because the temperature of the heat index might be at a point where you absolutely cannot have somebody working outside. So climate change not only is a public health risk, but it impacts our bottom line and our economy. And then thinking about sea level rise and something we like to call sunny day flooding or nuisance flooding, Wilmington sees about 70 to 80 days. That lower area down in Wilmington floods on a sunny day, just due to the sea level rise we've already seen. But if we project out into the future, we're expecting by the end of the century to see nuisance flooding in these low-lying places almost every single day of the year. And nuisance flooding really is a nuisance. It just isn't, oh, I have to go another way to work, but maybe you can't get to work. Maybe your child can't get to school because of the flooding, and that's the only place that they're getting a meal that day. We're asking a lot of these questions now with school closures, but this is extremely disruptive. The sea level rise that we're anticipating on the North Carolina coast will be absolutely disruptive to our state. So North Carolina is rapidly changing. It's warming. It's going to continue to warm outside of anything we've seen in our historical envelope. I just talked about disruptive sea level rise. It's going to be wetter, and those events are going to come in bigger chunks. More intense hurricanes, and we've had 3 big hurricanes in the last 4 years to grapple with, and higher humidity levels. This doesn't sound like a very hospitable place, and this is in store for us if our reliance on fossil fuels for energy continues. This comes directly from the North Carolina Climate Science Report. We know what we have to do to mitigate the impacts from climate change. We know we have to reduce our fossil fuel use, not just those of us in a city, not just those of us in North Carolina, but globally. But we also have to think about adaptation. Resiliency and adaptation isn't giving up, but it's accepting that we're moving into a world, a new normal that's constantly shifting, and we need North Carolina to be thriving despite all these challenges. So this is a lot. I recognize that this is, I could have come on here and talked about fun weather facts, but I chose to give a talk on climate change, and it was heavy for me to even think about putting together. And I wanted to just spend a little bit of time connecting it to what's going on now. What can we do? You may feel very powerless that there's this pandemic going on and, oh, I have to think about climate change too. This is my job. And I say, oh, I have to think about climate change too. Stay informed. Check out the Climate Science Report. A lot of folks put a lot of hard work into it. And there's a plain language summary there. If you're not looking to get into 240 pages, I think, just check out the 3-pager and check out some of the key findings. Stay informed. The best thing you can do is talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your family. Most people aren't thinking about climate change like I am 24 hours a day. Most people don't know a climate scientist. I've heard from folks, this is the first time someone's talked to us about climate change. You are the best messenger to your loved ones. I'm just a talking head right now on your computer screen. I'm giving you some facts and info, but you can make the most movement with your family and friends. So I do encourage you to not shy away from tough conversations. Stay vigilant. This isn't an either or. It's not COVID-19 or climate change. It's a both and it's not individual action or community action. It's both. So we're seeing right now that folks are taking individual actions to hunker down, not spread the disease, but we're also seeing, obviously, big policy change come out, stay-at-home orders, executive orders, and we need both of those for climate change. There really are so many striking parallels, and a number of us in this community, it feels very eerie because scientists warned us about this, and we still weren't prepared. So listen to experts. We know these things are coming. How do we use some of these lessons learned to prepare? And like I said before, you are your best messenger. We don't need the scientists always to be the frontline communicator. The scientists can provide you information, but listen to experts and then go out and spread the word to your family and friends. Support science. I have to say that I've been working now for a number of years, and I never thought my career in 2020 would be waving the flag to support science. It's easy to feel that things aren't going well right now with science, but there's overwhelming support of stay-at-home actions. There's overwhelming support of climate policy changes. There's a small but vocal opposition. And if you let those voices take over, then we're not going to get anywhere. So just science is on your side, and please stay on our side. And be kind to yourself, be kind to others. You don't have to take on every single global problem every day. You can be worried about the pandemic and not worry about climate change for a week, for a month, for a year. Other folks are doing it. We're going to get through the pandemic together, and we'll get through climate change together. So those are my closing thoughts. That's the first time I've ever closed a talk like this, but it is a really different world. So I'm going to turn it back over to Chris. I think we have time for some questions and discussion, but thank you for your attention. It's been great talking at you.
Thank you very much, Kathie. All right, everybody's watching. Big round of applause. Yay! Thanks so much. There's so much good information there. I mean, just to sort of wrap everything that's happening in North Carolina up, connecting it to global issues, and then how people can think about it and process it all in the times that we're in right now, too. That was an excellent job. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
So I kind of am curious, and I was thinking this, and Glenn, who's watching online, had the same question: is will we see a short-lived weather or climate effect from everybody staying at home?
That's an excellent question, and a lot of folks are studying this. We're certainly seeing that folks aren't flying, aren't driving. I saw a plane fly overhead the other day, and it felt bizarre. We're seeing a small drop in emissions, not huge, not enough to change the trajectory that we're on. But this underscores again that it's a both and, that it's individual action but big policy change that we need to enact. Climate policy, and also we can't totally tank our economy and our livelihoods and our social lives to get at climate action. So it's going to need to be bigger systemic change, holding some of the major polluters accountable. But this is a really interesting time to study some of this, study transportation policy, study how emissions are impacting folks, how some of these smaller scale policies are playing out. So, excellent question, Glenn.
There's another good one here too from Sarah. With North Carolina getting wetter and hotter, will we see longer periods of drought some years or in some regions of the state?
That's a great question, and my office focuses a lot on drought, so I'm almost embarrassed that I left this out. Yeah, so what we're planning on seeing is, or expecting to see, these big rainfall events, but also punctuated by what we call flash droughts, which tend to be these rapidly emerging periods of dry weather for a few weeks or a few months. We saw it at the end of last year, and they can be really disruptive if they occur at a certain planting time or a certain harvesting time. So yeah, we've got both things to grapple with: too much water and then too little water. And we saw that in 2018 and 2019. We flipped back and forth. And if you're a water manager or a farmer, I mean, wow, trying to plan for both of those things is super difficult.
Yeah, we had an expert at the museum not too long ago who was talking about some of these issues, and maybe you can speak to it too. But that, for example, in the mountains, there used to be a good amount of rainfall, but spread throughout the year or spread throughout an entire season or two. And now they'll get the same amount of rainfall in 3 or 4 rain events, it seems, that are really discrete. A whole lot of rain at once, it causes flooding and things like that, and then no rain for a while, and then huge downpours again.
Yeah, I mean, that you explained it probably better than I was going to. That's exactly what we're seeing. And when I said we're expecting to see more rain in North Carolina, it's because those big downpours will add up, but there will still be those spaces, those droughts in between them. And our drought of record is 2007. And cities were down to their last, few days of water. And by few days, I mean less than 100 days worth. But Atlanta got severely low. Durham got severely low. You can talk to a lot of folks here who started thinking about water infrastructure differently after that. So even though talking about drought today seems silly, it's certainly something that we're worried about. And with those hot temperatures coupled with these flash drought events, yeah, in the future, it's going to get a little bit worse.
How do you suggest people think about climate change? And by that, I mean, I see a lot of, say, we should act on climate change because sea turtles will be negatively impacted. Or we should act on climate change because lobster fishing will go away and that will, wreck an economy for this industry. Um, or we should address it because it's a problem that we caused. How do you bring all of those things together and what sometimes can be, really interesting messages coming from different places?
That's a really good question. And I think you have to think about what matters to you. I'm a terrible skier. So if I come out and start spreading a message about losing skiing, it's not very genuine from me. And to be honest, that's not the first thing on my mind when I think about climate change. But I do love our parks. I don't want the mountains to be smoky and under fire because of these hot, dry days like we saw in 2016, the Tennessee-North Carolina border.
Mm-hmm.
I care about this state and this people, and me personally, it's a moral issue. There are children who are inheriting this planet who did nothing to cause this. But I think you really have to think about how you relate to North Carolina, how you relate to the planet, what matters to you. And that's how some of the most effective climate communicators work. It wouldn't resonate with me going to the skiing community, but we're also seeing folks stand up in their communities, whether it's a community of faith or their actual community, and relating to folks through that. So I think making it personal always helps. I think those pictures of the polar bear floating around on the ice are done. That's not helping us message it or think about it. This is really something that's here in our backyards.
Looks like Noel or Noel in the YouTube chat is asking, how should we prepare for these changes?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question.
Yeah, right?
We have a lot of work to do. And one of the components of the governor's executive order on climate change is a risk and resiliency plan, which is now due out in June, last I heard. And it's actions that the state can take to prepare for climate change. And it's looking at everything. It's looking at transportation infrastructure. Are the culverts sized correctly? It's looking at low-lying coastal areas and looking at assets there. We're going to have to make really tough decisions with climate change in the future. Like, we're making tough decisions now. And they don't impact people equitably or across the board. And one of the things we really need to be doing to prepare for climate change is engaging communities in the conversation, making sure the right folks are at the table, the folks who know their system, know their town, who know their neighbors, and understanding some of the news about how it's not just so easy to pick up and move away from somewhere that you're family for 5 generations. Looking through a menu of adaptation options and trying to figure out which one fits the community best. No adaptation is one size fits all, or we would have figured this out by now. It's really messy and it's really complicated, but the thing that I'm pushing for the hardest, especially after COVID, is just making sure we're engaging the right folks at the table, because a bunch of pointy-headed people at the university coming up with community solutions doesn't work. We can be an important player in it, but we're not everything.
Everyone has to work together.
Yes.
So what are the solutions to some of these problems that you like? So what gives you hope right now?
What gives me still make change. We still have some time. That I'm hoping that folks see what's playing out now and start taking climate change and equity seriously. Some of those solutions that I like is that some adaptation isn't actually all that hard. I think we need to be looking at our policy levers, but things can be tweaked, fairly easily. I'm sure there are some policy folks on the phone who are getting up and throwing their hands around, but is it looking at zoning codes and changing those? Is it looking at adding sufficient cooling structures in certain parts of the city? I think there's some low-hanging fruit that we can tackle. Is it planting trees in areas that don't have a lot of shade or have the urban heat island? Is a lot warmer, and then trees add value to folks in the city. So I think there are some things we can do that aren't going to take massive legislation or tons of money, but it's also not going to be free to do the scale of what we need to do.
I guess my only thought is, any last thoughts?
Any last thoughts?
Maybe it's just your Twitter handle. People can go follow you, learn more.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Kathie Dello. You can also follow my office at NCSEO. There's usually, I know there will be a fun map today about the rainfall. Spoiler alert, but yeah, please reach out. I'm happy to talk with folks. I hope to get to meet some of you in the future, including you, Chris. I hope we get to actually meet in person eventually.
Yes.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm a huge fan of the museum, and I really enjoyed today.
Well, I personally think that kicking off the museum's Earth Week celebration with climate change and how climate change is impacting North Carolina is the perfect way to start off a week-long celebration. One of the biggest challenges facing the globe right now, current events aside, is climate change. And so starting off Earth Week and thinking about the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we had to do climate change. So I'm very grateful to you for jumping on here and doing this with us.
Thank you so much. This was great.
All right, everybody. One more round of applause for Kathie. Yay! And I want to say thank you for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed the broadcast. We will be back here at the museum's YouTube channel every day this week, Monday to Friday at noon. Tomorrow, the museum's collections manager for ornithology, so a bird expert, Brian O'Shea, he's going to be talking to us about threatened and endangered birds. Tomorrow happens to be World Curlew Day. So if you want to learn about some very interesting shorebirds and hear some what sound like pretty cool stories of extinction and recovery, then you'll want to be back here tomorrow at noon. Visit naturalsciences.org for more information and to see the full lineup of live virtual events that we have going on. Oh, one more I want to tell you about. Wednesday, Earth Day itself, 6:30 p.m., we're doing a streamathon. We're going to be here on YouTube, and I have a bunch of experts who are just going to roll through the live stream, take a few minutes to share with us their knowledge and expertise, their passion for the planet, and probably have some fun, play some games, do some trivia as we go through. So the Earth Week Streamathon, Wednesday night, go ahead, set your calendars, click the bell, set a reminder, and I think I'm supposed to say like and subscribe below and click the bell to get notifications from the museum. But if you're going to like and subscribe to any YouTube channel and you like and appreciate science, it should probably be the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Go check out Kathie Dello and the North Carolina State Climate Office, and we'll see you again tomorrow at noon. Bye, everybody. Take care.